As Hashem, today's daf is Masechta Kiddushin Daf Chof Tes, and we will begin on Daf Chof Ches Amid Beis by the Mishnah. So we're just finishing up one or two things from the Mishnah. The Mishnah discusses again acquisitions. How does Hegdish acquire something? Let's say Hegdish wants to buy an animal. The Beis Hamikdash wants to buy an animal. So Rishus Hagavoya, the Mishnah begins. Rishus Hagavoya, the way Beis Hamikdash acquires something is bekesef. If they give over money, the transfer of the cash, that automatically makes the acquisition. Hold on. So that makes the acquisition. So the Rishus Hagavoya behegdish. Rishus Hedyet, how does a commoner acquire something? Bechazaka, with bringing it over to you. So if you want to acquire an animal, either you could, let's say it's a small animal, you have to lift it up. It's not enough that you gave the cash. It's not your animal just because you gave the cash. You have to either hold it or bring it over towards yourself. That's called Mashicha. Then the Mishnah says, Amirasai legavoya, a commitment to the Beis Hamikdash. Let's say you promise something to do for the Beis Hamikdash. That's it. There's no backsies. It's as if something was given over by a commoner. If I gave something to somebody as a gift, there's no backsies. Once it's in his possession, I can't take it back. So just by verbalizing something belongs to Hegdish, automatically you can't take it back. So the Brisa begins. Turn around, the Brisa is taught. Ketzad Rishus Hagavoya bekesef. How does Hegdish acquire something with just money? So the Mishnah says, Gizbar, the treasurer of the Beis Hamikdash, Shenasa Moyes bebehema, gives money to pay for an animal. Afilu behema b'soif ha'olam, even if the animal's on the other side of the earth, right? Kana, it automatically belongs to Hegdish, because as soon as the Gizbar treasurer signed on the check and transferred it, that becomes his animal. Uvehedya, but a commoner who's purchasing an animal, loy kana achim shoich, it's not his animal until he actually draws the animal towards him. Well, of course, lifting is the best thing. Okay, that's the case. Ketzad, what's the case of amirasay legavaya kimisirasay lehedyed? A verbal declaration to the Beis Hamikdash is as if giving over something to a commoner. So the Gemara says, ha'omer shorzeh la'oila. If a person says this ox should be a carbon oila, bayazeh, this house, Hegdish, belongs to Hegdish. Afilu b'soifa oila, even if the ox or the house is on the other side of the world, kana, it really now belongs to Hegdish. You don't have to do anything further. But behedyet, but if you're giving it over to another commoner, so you're giving an ox or a house to another commoner, loy kana, the commoner does not acquire that. We go to Chavtesam and Aleph. Until he draws if it's an ox, until he draws it to himself, or if it's a house, v'yachzik, or he takes yachzik means he does a chazaka in the house. He shows ownership of the house by putting up a fence, putting up new door locks, whatever. That's now the Gemara Mishnah gives you now the Brisa gives you 4 cases. Interesting cases. Let's say a guy's buying something from Hegdish. Let's say he's redeeming something from Hegdish. Let's say an animal, okay, something that belongs to Hegdish. Meshachai b'mona, and you drew it to yourself, and it was worth 100 zuz mana, but you didn't pay for it yet. But you didn't give Hegdish the money that you promised. That you're going to give Hegdish the money, because when you give the money, the kedusha of whatever that's on that item that you're acquiring from Hegdish gets transferred over to the money. But let's say you didn't pay for it, and the price went up. Inflation hit, and there was a double inflation. It went from 1 mana, it went to 2 manas, Messiah. Noisa Messiah, you have to give 200 to a Hegdish, because my time, because what's the reason? In order to acquire something from Hegdish, you actually have to give the money over to Hegdish. And as long as you didn't give over the money to Hegdish, then in order for you to make it effective, you have to give the higher amount, because you didn't acquire it just by Mashicha. But what happens, number 2, Mashacha b'Messiah, you did Mashicha, you drew the whatever it was to yourself when it was worth 200. But you didn't actually actually give the money over to Hegdish or redeem it, it went down in value. It went down to half its price. So what price do you really have to pay Hegdish? So the answer is Noisin Messiah. You have to give the higher price to Hegdish at the time it was worth when you actually did the Meshicha. Wait a second. Doesn't Hegdish only kind of something when you actually pay for it? So I don't really own it. It was really belonging to Hegdish. So now I'm owning it by paying for it. So why do I have to pay the higher price? I should pay what it's worth now, a mana. My tama, lo yehei koyach hegya komer mehegdish. Because if Hegdish was a commoner, then you would have to pay the higher price. Because Meshicha, when you did Meshicha, that made it yours. And therefore, if Hegdish, if it wasn't Hegdish, it was a commoner, then you would have to pay the higher price. So we don't want that situation where a Hedyot would actually get more money in the same situation than Hegdish. So therefore, we equalize it and say that no matter what, even if Hegdish was on the other side of the transaction, we'll say that the kinyan happened already by the Mashiach, even though normally the kinyan happens with regard to Hegdish when you actually give over money. Now, gives you another third case. Let's say you redeemed it when it was 200. You actually paid Hegdish the money. You gave over the cash, but then you didn't do Mashiach and the price went down. Do you get money back from Hegdish? Because now it's only worth a mana. There's no backseas. Hegdish doesn't give you a refund. Why? Because you paid money for it. And as soon as you paid money for it, it's yours. Because Hegdish, when you're buying something from Hegdish, it becomes yours just by the kesef alone. My timer, what's the reason? As soon as you give the kesef, it's yours. And therefore, when you gave the kesef, it was worth 200, even though you didn't do Mashiach in it and it dropped to one mana, Hegdish does not give you a refund. But here's where it gets interesting. Padoi b'mona. Let's say you gave the Hegdish money and it was worth a mana. But you didn't do the Mashiach until it was worth 200. Now, you would think that if you want to put on the person the stringencies, he should owe another 100 to Hegdish because the price that Hegdish actually sold it to him was worth mana. He didn't do Mashiach yet, and now it's worth 200. So the Gemara says, Masha podi, whatever you did is did, and you made the profit, and that's it. You don't have to give further than the mana that you gave. Amai, says the Gemara, why? Let's let Hegdish win this situation also and require the person to pay the 200. So the Gemara says, let us not say that the Hedyot should be more stricter than the Hegdish. And since you didn't do Mashiach, and Mashiach is where a Hedyot is kind of something, and you didn't do Mashiach, we should require you to pay another mana. So the answer is, Atu Hedyot la ba mishaparakai. But at the end of the day, the deal was made when the item was worth a mana, and if even a Hedyot who made a deal and committed that he's going to sell the item at a mana, and if then the price goes up, if he backs out of the deal, there's a concept called he gets a curse from the God who punished the Dor HaMabel and the Dor HaFlaga should punish you for somebody who commits and then backs out. That's a bad thing to back out on a deal. So Hegdish, we don't want Hegdish also to be backing out on a deal, requiring you to pay more money. Therefore, when you actually gave a mana to Hegdish, so basically it's Hegdish's commitment to you that that's going to be your item. And therefore, even if you didn't do Mashiach until it already went up to 200, that's it. Hegdish loses out because Hegdish committed on this deal, and we want Hegdish to be the example to people that once you commit on a deal, it's not good to back out, even though technically, according to the law, you could back out because there's no proper kinyan of Mashiach here. But again, Hegdish committed to this deal, and Kesef actually works by Hegdish, so they don't require you to pay another mana. New Mishnah. And this is where it gets more familiar. Kol ha-mitzvahs haben al ha'av. Any mitzvah that a mitzvah means any obligation that you have to do for your son. What obligation do I have to do for my son? Let's say give him a bris milah, or teach him a profession. Al ha'av, it's the father's obligation to do it, and therefore anashim chayavim, the fathers are mechuyev, v'nashim paturas, and women are not obligated. V'chol hamitzvahs ha'av al haben, any obligation that you have to do to your father that's required on the children, which means kibbut av v'eim, echad anashim ve'echad nashim chayavim, whether you're a man or a woman, you're obligated. You're obligated. So women are also chayiv in kibbut av v'eim. V'chol mitzvahs asay shahazman grama, any mitzvahs asay that the time causes it to happen. In other words, a mitzvah asay like shofar or lulav, that it's the season that brings on the mitzvah. So therefore, anashim chayavim, only men are obligated in that mitzvah. V'nashim peturis, and nashim are not obligated in that mitzvah. V'chol mitzvahs asay shaloi hazman garma, and any mitzvahs asay that is not time related. Like hashavas aveda, returning a lost object. So things, mitzvahs say that are not time related. Echad hanashim ve'echad nashim chayavim. Both men and women are obligated in that type of mitzvah. Now we go to the opposite. V'chol mitzvahs loisa say a negative commandment. Bein shazman grama, bein shloy hazman grama. Whether it's time related. Like not doing malacha on Yantiv, or not doing malacha work on Shabbos, or whether it is time related. A mitzvah loisa say. All these things, echad ha'anashim, whether you're a man, ve'echad ha'anashim, whether you're a woman, chayavim. So let's say eating the carbon pesach, not breaking a bone by the carbon pesach. It says don't break a bone when you're eating the carbon pesach. Well, since women are obligated, this is a loisa say, even though it's a zman garma, it's a carbon pesach, even women are obligated in that loisa say. Chutz, there's an exception that there a loisa say that a woman are not obligated. 3 negative commandments that women are not obligated. 1, bal takif, they're not obligated to shave off their payas, basically to circle their head, to make like a crown. Lahavdil, what the Nazis Yamach Shemam used to do, just make a crown. Take a go off the payas, ubal tashchis, or using a razor blade on the beard. So not only that, they don't have that lav. In fact, they could be a barber to do it to another Jew, because they're not involved in that lav. Ubal titami lemesim, and they don't have the avera if they're a kohenes, if they come from a family of Kohanes, they don't have the loisa say of going to a levaya and going to a cemetery and touching a mace. It's only a kohen, not a kohenes. Now, the Gemara explains, what does it mean? The mitzvah that a son has to do for his father? Does the Mishnah mean, and I didn't learn this way in the Mishnah, does the Mishnah mean that all the mitzvahs that a son has to do for his father, a woman are pater? In other words, that kibbut av v'eim only applies to men and not to girls, to boys and not to girls. Tanya, we learned in the Ma'isa, it says ish imay va'aviv tira'u ish ein li'el ish. It says only a man is obligated to fear their parents. Isha manayin. How do you know a woman also? Kshu oimer, when its pasuk says ish imay va'aviv tira'u, both of you should fear your father and mother. Harei kan shnayim, it's referring to 2 types of genders. Male and female are both obligated to fear their parents and to respect their parents. So how could you say that the Mishnah means to say that only if mitzvah that a son has to do to his father, only boys are obligated, not women? And since the Gemara, you learned wrong pshat in the Mishnah, as we explained. This is what the Mishnah means to say. Any obligation, let's touch the word mitzvah as an obligation that is on the responsibility of the father to do to his son. Only the father is obligated to do that obligation and not the mother. Tanina lahatu taner rabbanan, and that's a proof that the following brisa is accurate, because the brisa pretty much sums up what the Mishnah forgot to say, didn't mention. Ha'av chayev b'vnoi, an av father is obligated for his son lumulai, to give him a bris milah, v'liftaisai, if he's a firstborn he has to pay to him, or give him a pidyon a ben, u'lalamdai Torah, to teach him Torah, u'la'asiya isha, and to help him get married, right? Ulalamdai umnus, and to teach him a profession. V'yeshayim, and others say af lahashita b'mayim, to teach him how to swim in case he's stuck out there in an emergency situation. He has to know, a father has to teach his son how to swim. Rabbi Yehuda says, Kol she'enim melamed es b'nai umnis. If you're not teaching your son a profession, melamdei listis, you're teaching him to become an outlaw or a bandit. So what do you mean? Listis sakadaitich? Am I teaching him? If I don't teach him umnis, if I don't send him to secular studies, so does that mean I'm teaching him to be a bandit? I'm not teaching him anything. Elo, says Rabbi Yehuda, means to say, it's implied that you're teaching him how to bandit. If you're not giving him the skills to make a living, it's you're automatically, without realizing it, causing him to become an outlaw, because he's going to eventually have to support himself and he would not have the skills to do so. So the Gemara explains the brisa. Lemula, it's an obligation of the father to give a bris milah for a son. Menalam, the pasuk says, "V'yamal Avram es Yitzchak." Avram gave a bris milah to Yitzchak because Benai, it was his son. So, and the Gemara says, in a situation where the father did not give his son a bris milah, then it's obligation of Gans Klal Yisrael to give the person a bris milah. Because the pasuk says, "Himar lechem kol zachar." There's a pasuk in Lech Lecha that says, make sure that all males have a bris milah. So it's an obligation on Klal Yisrael if the father, for some reason, refuses to give his son a bris milah. The heicha de loymala beidina. Let's say the Klal Yisrael didn't do it, or for some reason they let him be without a bris milah. It's an obligation on himself to give himself his own bris milah. The pasuk says, if a person did not give himself a bris milah, then he gets kares. So we see that the father has an obligation to give the bris milah. How do you know that the mother is not obligated to give a bris milah? Because the pasuk says that God commanded him. God commanded Avraham Avinu. It was commandment to Avraham and not to Sarai. So the Gemara says, that's only the story about Avram and Sarah, that maybe at that time, God did not command Sarah to give a bris milah to Yitzchak because Avraham was around. But how do you know in the future generations, no mother is obligated to give her son a bris milah, l'dairis minolam? How do you know in the future generations that it's not up to the mother? Rabbi Shmuel taught us, whenever the Torah says tzav, which basically it's like a motivation, right? A galvanization. Eina elaziris, it's to galvanize and to shock somebody into doing something. Here it says kashatziva oiselekim. It was a commandment. Miyad uladairis. Whatever applied at the time of Avraham Avinu also applied to generations later. And just like the time of Avraham Avinu, Sarai was not obligated to give a bris milah to Yitzchak. So also all mothers are not obligated to give a bris milah to their son. How do you know the word tzav means zeres? To motivate. The pasuk says, "V'tzav es Yeshuva chaskei v'amtzeo." It's a commandment to Moshe Rabbeinu to give motivation to Yeshua, strengthen him, and give him heart to what he's about to do. And how do you know miyad l'daris? It's the word tzav applies not only for now but for generations. So we see that the word tzav applies for today and for generations. So whatever you saw by Avraham Avinu applied not only at that time, but applies to generations later. Liftoisai, the Brisa said that's an obligation to give pidyon ben to your own son. Diksiv, manolam, diksiv, kol b'chol b'necha tivda. All sons or your b'charim, your firstborns, you have to give a pidyon ben. Let's say the father did not give a pidyon ben for his son. He's obligated to give himself a pidyon ben. Because the pasuk says, we cross this out, ti podeh. Instead of reading it tifdeh, you could read it ti podeh. You do it to yourself. So in case when you get older and you have money and your father didn't give you a pidyon ben, you have to do it for yourself. How do you know that a woman is not obligated, the mother is not obligated to pay her own son? The pasuk says, tivda ti padeh. That means ti padeh means you pay to yourself, tivda do it to others. If you have to give a pidyon for yourself, mitzvah then you should do it to others. If you don't have to do it for yourself, you don't have to be paid to others. So now the woman is not obligated to be paida her own son because she doesn't have to be paida herself. Now, how do I know that? How do you know if she's the firstborn, she doesn't need a pidyon? How do you know a woman, when she's the firstborn, how do you know maybe she has to give herself a pidyon a ben? The ksiv, the answer is tipoda tivda. We darshan it this way. If somebody's required to do it to her, then she has to do it to herself. If nobody has to be paid to her, they don't have to be paid to themselves. So now you have to go to the last step. The last step is, how do you know that a person who has a baby girl, he doesn't have to be paid? How do you know that nobody have to be paida their child if it's a girl? Because the pasuk says, "Kol b'chor b'necha tivde." It says b'necha only if it's a boy, but like b'nesecha, not a girl. So because of that, therefore, there's no pidyon of ben on the mother, and therefore she doesn't have to do it for herself. She doesn't have to do it for her own child. So now this obligation of being paida pidyon of ben only applies to the father. Tana Rabbanan, rabbis taught, who liftois ufdai niftois, if he only has, we'll see what this means. If he has money to be paid himself or his son, let's say his father did not give him a pidyon a ben, and now he has his own child. So and he only has a little bit of money. Who kaidin lovnoi? Then first obligation is to be paid to yourself, and then do pidyon a ben on your son. Rabbi Yehuda benoi kaidba, your son comes first. Because to be paid to your son, to pay to yourself, that's your father's mitzvah. This child's mitzvah is mitzvah's b'nai alav. It's a mitzvah on you to be paid to the child. So Rabbi Yehuda says, if you have money, pay to the child and don't pay to yourself. And the Rabbanan say, no, pay to yourself and don't pay to the child. So Amar Rabbi Yomi explained, Hakol Maidin, everybody would agree, Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanim. We go to Chavtes Amid Beis. Everybody would agree. Let's say he only has 5 sela in his pocket. Enough. He has a job. He could earn money. It's not his last 5 sela. He knows he has a job tomorrow, but he only has 5 sela in his pocket. And now he has a dilemma. He didn't get a pidyon a ben, and his son was born, and his son didn't get a pidyon a ben. So what's the answer? Everybody would agree. Who kaitim l'roi? You do it to yourself. My time. What's the reason? Mitzvah de gufei al difa. This mitzvah is first like you put the oxygen mask on yourself first, and then your kid. So there's a mitzvah obligation on you to be paid to yourself. That takes precedence over the mitzvah to do it for your son. So there's no machlokes about that. Keep pligi. When is the machlokes? Heicha the ike chamesh mushubadim the chamesh b'nei cherem. Let's say you had 5 in a loan. In other words, you had a piece of karka, a land, a piece of real estate, and you had a pidyon. You were supposed to pay to yourself. You did not. But what you did was you sold that piece of property, and then your son was born. So now this is what happened. And the chomesh b'nei cherem, and you only have 5 sela in your pocket. So Rabbi Yehuda has this interesting opinion. Milva de ksiba Torah, the milva that's written in the Torah. In other words, you had an obligation to be paid to yourself. So kiksuva b'shar dami. That's as if it's written up in a document, and there's a 5 sela lien on the property you sold before your son was born. So therefore bahani chomesh perek lebrei. With the 5 in your pocket, you should be paid to your own son. Va'azul kohen, and then the kohen could go the kohen can foreclose on the property that you sold because he had a prior lien on that property. You had no right to sell it when you owed the kohen money for your own pidyon a ben. So first use the free cash to pay to your son, and then the kohen will try to foreclose on the property because you owe him for the pidyon a ben on yourself. Rabbanan hold like this: pidyon a ben is not something that has a lien on a property. Milva de ksiba raisa, something that you're obligated to pay min Torah. For example, your own pidyon a ben, it's not like it's written in a star, and therefore hilcha mitzvah de gufei adav. Therefore, the kohen can never collect from the property. So the only way he can collect on your pidyon a ben is from your free cash, and therefore you should be paid to yourself. And whatever happens to your son, hopefully you'll find money later on. Tana Rabbanan. You have enough money to be paid to your son, or take a nice Sukkot vacation in Israel. So, give the pidyon a ben for your son, and some other time you'll go up for Yontiv. The pidyon a ben takes precedence. Rabbi Yehuda, go for Sukkot to Israel. Why? Then do pidyon a ben. Because this mitzvah of aliyah l'regel will pass. And therefore, if you miss it, you'll never be able to make it up. V'zu mitzvah shein averis, but the mitzvah of pidyon a ben is not leaving you. So therefore, you'll eventually have money to be paid to your son. So use the money first to go aliyah l'regel, and then later on, when you make more money, you'll pay to your son. So the Gemara says, Bishlam Rabbi Yehuda K'dabatama. Rabbi Yehuda gave a good, nice reason. Do aliyah l'regel and then do pidyon ben. El Rabbana mai tamai. What's the reason the Rabbanan hold of their opinion? Da'amakra, because the pasuk says, Kol b'chol b'necha tivda. First, the Torah says, do pidyon ben, and then come up to, and then the pasuk, you follow the sequence. Don't come empty-handed for aliyah l'regel. So see that the Torah seems to put it priority as pidyon ben first, and then aliyah l'regel. Let's say a person had 5 wives and had a bachar from each wife. How do I know Yechayiv and pidyon ben for those 5 kids? Talmud loyme kol bachar b'necha tivda. All your bachar, a person can have more than one bachar and require pidyon ben. Says the Gemara Pshita, if you have 5 wives, certainly Yechayiv pidyon ben for each one. That's the first one born from each womb of your wife. So if you have 5 wives and you have 5 becharim, you have to give 5 pidyon ben. That's simple. And so the Gemara, I would have thought, I would think that just by, if we compare the bechar, we should compare a char to inheritance. And by inheritance, there's only one bechar, your firstborn, that's firstborn to you. But not the firstborn to the wife. And I would learn Gzeir Shava or some Mamatzino that you would not be obligated to give pidyon ben for all the different becharim. That's why we have the word kol over here that says if you have 5 wives, each one of them requires you to give a pidyon ben for their first child. The Torah says, the Gemara says that if you have an obligation to teach your son Torah. How do you know? You have to teach your children. That's in Krishma. If your father didn't teach you, and he didn't pay for your yeshiva tuition, then you have to teach Torah to yourself. You have to teach yourself. We read it, not vilamatem, that you teach others. Ulamatam, you should teach yourself. Now the question is, how do you know the mother is not obligated to teach her son Torah? The pasuk says, limatem, ulamatem. Kol mitzvah a little bit. If you have a mitzvah to learn for yourself, mitzvah lalamed, and you have to teach the others. The kol she'ein mitzvah live. If you're not obligated to learn by yourself, ein mitzvah lalamed. You're not required to teach others. Now, so that teaches you that you have to have the obligation to learn yourself before you can teach others. The how do you know a woman doesn't have to teach herself? Maybe she also has an obligation to learn Torah. Answers the Gemara, the Ksiv, limatem ulumatem. If anybody whose parents have to teach them Torah, then they have to teach themselves. If their parents don't have to teach them, then they don't have to teach themselves. So what we learn that because a lady, a girl, is her parents do not require to teach her Torah. At least in the sense of that, the way a boy learns Torah. So therefore, she's not required to teach others. And now, how do we know others are not required to teach her Torah? In other words, how do you know if you have a girl, you're not really obligated to teach her Torah? Torah, basically, it's like Torah Shabbat Peh. The kind of stuff that we're doing is it says teach your sons, but not your daughters. So therefore, there's no obligation to teach your daughters, and therefore, a mother is not required to teach her son Torah. One more piece of Gemara, and then we'll stop. One more minute. Tanu Rabbanim, the rabbis taught, who lilmaid, ubenai lilmaid, who kaidim livnai. If you have a choice between, if you only have money to pay tuition for yourself or for your son, then you take the obligation first. and you should teach yourself Torah before you teach your son Torah. Rabbi Yehuda says, in B'nai Zaros, if your son is very diligent, Umamulach, a very successful person, V'talmidim Eskayim B'yadai, and he takes to heart what he learns. So you have a very precocious child, then, and you only have money to pay for tuition either for yourself or for your son. In that case, B'nai Kaidmei, then your son takes precedence over you. Kihar, like the following story. The Rav Yaakov, there was a person called Rav Yaakov. He bred Rav Acha. He was the son of Rav Acha. His father's name was Rav Acha Bar Yaakov. I guess the father was named Acha Bar Yaakov, so he was named after his grandfather. So basically, this Rav Yaakov, Shadru Avu Alakamei Dabaya. His father sent him to learn Torah in the yeshiva of Abaya. He also, when the Rav Yaakov came home, Bein Hazmanim, Chazia, Rav Acha saw that his son Rav Yaakov saw the loy hava mechadin shmaitze. He wasn't sharp in his answers. Amalei, so he said to him, Ano adifim minach. I'm better than you. You Tuva, you mind the store. You stay here and work. The Ezalana, I'm going to learn in yeshiva by Abaya. So Shama Abaya heard the Kahava Ka'asi, that this Rav Acha is coming to learn in his yeshiva. So the Gemara says a fascinating story. Havahu mazik bei Rabban Abaya. There was this mazik, like a shindalid, a demon in the yeshiva of Abaya. The Chiyava Ayli betrayed, even if two people will go into the yeshiva, Afilu b'yamama during the daytime, where normally demons do not attack humans. Have bitaski, this demon would attack the humans. Amalahu, so Abaya said to the people in the city, Loilesav inish ashpiza, nobody should give a place Rabbi Acha to sleep. We want him to sleep in the Beit Rabbanan, in the Beis Medrash. After the Misrachash Nisha, maybe a nace is going to happen. In other words, maybe a nace will happen. The great Rabbi Acha walks into the Beis Medrash, the demon is going to die, or Rabbi Acha is going to pray that the demon's going to die. That's not a nace. It's just the fact that you can pray for anything. Rabbi Acha was a powerful person who had a very strong power with prayer. All the Rav Acha bas behebu rabbanim. He had no place to stay, so he ended up sleeping in the space medrash. Idamale kitanina de shivaresh. I'll say this demon appeared to him like a snake that had 7 heads. Kol kriya. So he started to pray. Rav Acha. Kol kriya the Korah. Every time he made with his knees to bend, not the chadresha, one head of that demon fell apart. And after 7 bends, so to speak, the demon became killed. Amalahu lamacha. So Rav Acha said the next day to Abaya, he thought it was a nace that this happened. And Rav Acha thought it wasn't his prayer that caused the demon to die. It was just a miracle. If it didn't have this miracle, Sakintin, I would have been in great danger. But that was just out of humility. Really, it was his prayer. So we're going to stop by the Tanur Rabbanan on the bottom of towards the bottom of Chof Tesam and Beis.